are quite insightful in terms of why emerging adults are engaging in such behaviors. They lacked the empirical support that is obtained through research. Is there a possible relationship, perhaps between early family environment and suicidal behaviors? Now, Dr. Marion Mutweri has conducted a study backed with research titled Suicidal Behaviors Among Emerging Adults in Kenyan Universities. She joins us today to divulge more information into this worrying trend. What are the risk factors? What causes this? And how can we bring the numbers down in one way or the other? Dr. Marion, karibu sana to the show. Welcome to News Center and good morning.
Good morning and thank you very much for having me, Jesse.
It's really great to have you with us.
Yes.
Being a psychologist, this is a conversation that perhaps is needed.
Yes.
But from the news point of view, it's usually quite unfortunate reading such stories of young minds taking their own lives. Hence, the need to discuss some of the causative factors around this. Let's start with the prevalence rate of suicidal behaviors among young minds, those who are pursuing education, various education courses in universities. What are the prevalence rates as we speak?
Great. Maybe a little background on that.
Yeah.
I am a lecturer myself at the USIU Africa.
Yes.
And also a practicing psychologist. I run a practice called Farm Hoop. And I observed a trend. I observed students that were thinking about suicide, planning, attempting, and harming themselves. And I was curious, what is the reason? What would make a student at the age of 21, 25, 19 decide to take away their lives?
Yeah.
And therefore, I got onto this project to be able to understand. And a lot of us have heard the information about suicide because it's the end product of what we are calling suicidal behaviors. So suicidal behaviors come before an actual suicide has been completed. And therefore, for us to understand why students are committing suicide, we need to understand what is the behavior that is going on at this particular moment. And that is what brings me now to the statistics that I discovered while I was working on this piece of work. And we have discovered from the findings that 17.1% of our students are thinking about suicide. And of all the suicidal behaviors, this is the highest. Most students are thinking about suicide. About 7.8% are planning. Have attempted suicide. 5.9 have planned, and 5.5 are doing what we call self-harm. They are cutting themselves, they're using alcohol. For men, they're doing tattoos, because it's easier for a man to tattoo than to be seen cutting themselves because it looks feminine. And it is interesting because they are not just doing it once. It is repeated. There are multiple attempts. When I asked students, because this study was done among students, but also university counselors, to be able to understand, do the counselors who are working with the students understand what is going on the ground? So the students themselves, so there was a survey, there was a focus group discussion, and there was what we call a Delphi, information given by a professional. So the students said, about 7 of them, on a scale of 1 to 10, where the scale was asking, at what is the prevalence of students committing suicide in your school, in your institution? So the highest was 10, and the lowest was 1. So 7 students for suicidal thinking gave a 7. 8 students for suicidal planning gave a 4. 8 students for suicidal attempt gave a 4, and 5 students gave a 2. However, the university counselors, majority of them actually said that these behaviors are rarely happening.
So there's definitely a disconnect.
There is.
Okay, and that's definitely worrying because they're placed right there to help those who are going through certain issues to alleviate the situation in one way or the other. As you were conducting this study, what were the causative risk factors? What contributed to such suicidal behaviors majorly amongst this Kenyan youth?
there was a worrying observation first and foremost between gender, because more female students across the board were at risk of suicidal behaviors. More female students were attempting suicide, they were thinking about suicide, they were planning suicide, and they were engaging in self-harm. Secondly, is our private universities are more at risk of suicidal behaviors than the public universities. In fact, the only aspect or the only suicidal behavior the public university was at risk of is self-harm, because for the private university, it was at 4.0%, while for the public university, it was at 6.8%. Okay. Then we quickly go to what are some of the risk factors. One risk factor was age. The younger you send a student to the university, anyone who was 19 years and below was at risk of suicidal behavior. So 1 is gender, 2 is age, 3 is being in a private university. The 4th thing is your year of study. The 4th year students, just like the reports you talked about that I had observed, the 4th year students are most at risk of suicidal planning, suicidal attempt, and self-harm. And some of the reasons is because of the transitions. There is such an unpredictability of the transition to the outside world. It was very predictable being in school. It was very predictable, going into class, walking out, but I'm leaving. The job market is not open for me. Where am I going? The home environment had ran away from, that was quite disturbing. I'm going back right into it. So this became some of the factors. But also there were family risk factors that were involved. One is having a parent who's highly educated. Jesse, do you know 72.2% of my respondents had parents who had done college education and above? 72.2. Yet they are at most risk. Why? Because educated parents have high demands and little support. And especially at the level of emerging adults. Some of the students spoke to me and told me, please tell our parents to actually remember that we are still not mature. So when I enter first year, don't just walk away and leave me emotionally, abandon me financially, because I can hustle and get something. And now you can take care of everybody else. So that was a risk factor. Another family risk factor is being brought up in a blended family or by a guardian.
Understandable.
And also being a firstborn or a 5th and above. Again, the pressure, being a firstborn, there's such pressure for you to set a standard for your siblings. But being a 5th and and below, you already have so many people above you who have set very high standards, and therefore you're supposed to follow. So what are some of the things that I discovered are actually the reasons why our emerging adults are engaging in suicidal behavior? One is that there is quite a high rate of mental health symptoms among our students. In fact, statistics showed that most students engaged in suicidal behaviors because they were feeling hopeless, 35%. 33% had very severe feelings of depression. And 27% were anxious, they had anxiety. So when you think about the 3, hopelessness, depression or feeling depressed, and anxiety, they were the highest risk factor for our students. However, the general stressors that were involved in their lives included financial difficulties, having conflict with families, sexual abuse, either it was a sexual assault, rape, or even incest, academic challenges, conflict with parents, and intimate partner problems.
So we've talked about the causative factors, the risk factors, what contributes to such thoughts in terms of suicidal behaviors. How important is a family system, a strong family system, in terms of overcoming some of these mental challenges that might push someone to having suicidal thoughts? And equally, let's speak about, now that we've identified the issues, the risk factors, how best can we approach such an issue Because it's definitely concerning. One life is too many, as they say.
Yeah. The family is a very important and natural environment for nurturing holistic development, whether it's mental, physical, nutritional, psychological, and social, and even spiritual. And one of my objectives was what aspect of family environment, early family environment, what happened between the age of 0 to 12 years that predisposes an emerging adult at the age of 19 to 25 to actually engage in suicidal behavior. And the findings were amazing. We don't have the time to discuss that today. But what we discovered is that it's not too late for the family to come back, because the family at the early stage needs to prepare an emerging adult to be an independent individual. They need to prepare them to solve problems, to face challenges, because life is tough. In fact, some of the students told me, our parents never told us the truth. They never told us that life is hard, and therefore you're faced with a broken relationship, and the last thing you're thinking is, I have so much pain in my heart. The best way to relieve that pain is to cut myself and see some blood oozing out, and I feel good. Or if this guy has left me, why am I alive? I just decide I'm going to take my life without thinking that actually, our parents had broken relationships, but they never told us how they managed that. Our very own parents went to campus and they had challenges of, what am I eating today? But they didn't tell us how they overcame some of those things. So if we were given skills, if our students are given skills by parents to be able to understand this, then they would do well. Another risk factor that was very shocking for me was that 40% of our students live in hostels outside of the university, and that's a risk factor.
Outside the university? One would expect those inside the university, perhaps due to the maybe living conditions that might be a little bit worse, perhaps due to the type of university you go, especially public. Going to public, I know how the living conditions within university are compared to outside. So why is that?
Because there is, within the university, your cubes were very close to one another. You probably had a roommate. But if you're outside, being alone is a risk factor, because who knows you haven't cooked? Who knows you've not eaten anything for so long? Who knows you've not showered? Which are some of the factors to tell that you're not okay. When self-care has been withdrawn, or you take very little care of yourself, then that's a challenge. And one of the things that becomes very important is that we must use a multidisciplinary preventative and interventions to be able to actually deal with this situation. Beginning from home. Do we check on our emerging adults when we send them to school? Do we? Did your parents know where you lived?
Yes, they did. They followed up.
Yes. So those who are parents that showed care and concern. But a lot of our parents just send you. They hope and, wish that you're doing well. They don't have an idea of the conditions in which you live. So parents need to engage a little bit more, because emerging adults are on a transition. They are not yet adults, but also they are not children. And that becomes important for them to engage. The person who's offering the hostels, the same way they provide an emergency number for medical care, there needs to be an emergency number for psychological support. And to be able to realize that the person living in your own hostels, if they're at risk, you get bad publicity. That people are dying in your hostels and there is no concern that actually seems to be taken care of. A teacher, like me, a professor, if I see a student is not handing in an assignment, has not been coming to class, is unkempt, I need to take a bit more concern and be able to go beyond demanding for grades and actually care for that student.
And I have to ask this because it's proper you brought in the teacher's aspect, because not every family is supportive. And in some cases, not everyone has a family to lean back on.
That's true.
So it definitely brings in other interventions. What's the role of faith and religion in, getting rid of such a vice in the society?
That's a very interesting question, because that was my fourth objective. What is the role of spirituality in suicidal behavior among emerging adults? Now, some disturbing facts is that being atheist was the highest risk of suicidal behavior. Having no convictions about life, because having a faith provides you meaning and purpose in life, including meaning of suffering. It gives you a purpose for which you're alive today.
Yes.
And you can wake up today and come to work because you know the purpose for which you're living for. But also you have a community of support. If people don't see you in your community of faith for a week or 2 or a month, they will come looking for you, isn't it?
Yes.
But if you do not belong anywhere, no one is going to actually look for you. And therefore that becomes important. But also, an interesting factor is that confiding in a religious leader is a risk factor to suicidal behavior.
As well. So it's a double-edged sword.
So spirituality came out as both a risk and a protective factor.
Okay.
The protective factor is in being able to create meaningful relationships. That's number one, where a person feels loved, wanted, and supported. Secondly, is being able to find a personal conviction of meaning and purpose. That I struggle through to actually find even the most painful experiences in my life have shaped me. They are preparing me to be a better person, a better human being, or also to enter into the place of my calling and my service as a human being. So the place of spirituality is very important, and the place of any other person who comes into contact with the student, including the university counselor. One of the crises we have today is that we have so few university counselors among so many students. In a university with about 7,000 students, having 3 counselors, you know the population of that? It is 1 into 2,333 students. Who can take care of such a number of students? It is impossible to be able to offer, if we are serious about providing mental health support in our universities, we better provide the manpower that can be able to empower our students.
So as we finalize, we're plugging into a national conversation. Your research is based on, young minds in universities across the country. But we've seen various instances of perhaps youth who have finished studies, some who have gone abroad, haven't received much support, and they decide to, take that route. That is quite unfortunate. But as we plug into the national conversation, even with those from the disciplined forces, the police, where we've seen such cases, what exactly should we do? Because there's that saying that you train a tree while it's still young. There's so much you can do while they're at the inceptive stage, while they're growing up, in order to avoid such instances happening, especially in the latter years. Add your voice to this as we finalize in terms of the approach we should use as a country towards ending this vice that just doesn't affect Kenyan university students, but people across all age groups.
One is we must begin to talk about this openly. The place of psychoeducation, the place of conversation. If you remember during COVID, there was such a serious campaign to create awareness over what people should do. Very clear directions over what we should do. Wash hands, keep distance. It was everywhere. It was published everywhere. It was written everywhere. What is it as a country do we know about mental health? I think we know very little. We know very little about mental health. That conversation has been locked in the psychiatrist's office, has been locked into the counselor's office, and not been taken out to the public. So as a country, we need to open space. Jesse, I keep saying there's no one who is mad. People are sick in the streets. The man who does not have clothes in the market has probably schizophrenia. And the family has no idea how to take care of that man on the streets. The person who is depressed can have a full-time job if they have care, that is medical care and psychological support, and family or a society that is actually supportive. So number one is policies need to be addressed. And I know we are having a lot of conversations today with the mental health bills that, and the workers, the counselors, the psychologists. There's a lot of conversation going on. But this conversation needs to go to the breakfast table. It needs to go to the dinner table. I have children, Jesse. I have 3 children. between the age of 12 to 8.
Okay.
We talk about emotions. How are you feeling today? Finally, as a country, we can no longer tell people, oh, you want to kill yourself? Here. That sarcasm has resulted into lots of death.
All right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So the days our parents lived is not the same as we are today.
Okay.
We are experiencing a lot of emotional distress with very little skills to deal with that. So can we understand and develop skills from a young age? Can we open our hearts to help people?
Okay, thank you so much. One can tell you're truly passionate about this topic, and it goes without saying. Make sure you plug into the conversation back at home. We were joined right here by Dr. Marion Mutweri, who is a lecturer at USIU at the Department of Psychology, just shedding more light into that national conversation, all to do with suicidal behaviors. Her particular part in terms of her study focused on